Variance Project is debuting their first generation of talents in July, with so much hype surrounding the debut. Variance itself has a lot of lore, so I'm going to be breaking down this VTuber agency's lore, as well as theorizing what's to come with their story. But to start off, what is Variance Project? Variance Project is a European VTuber agency that has its stories and VTubers placed into factions: Chiron, Corruptors, Goneden, Nakota, Seraphine, and Ziton. Each of these factions reside in a magical world with magic stones called Arcanite, magic storms called Fluxes, and ancient gates which were used by the gods to defeat evil. This is a rather interesting twist on the common VTuber debut formula. Most VTubers and VTuber agencies have lore, but it's nice seeing it this interconnected. It's a great way to tie together each of the VTubers' lores and keep fans invested in not only their Oshis, but the overall story as well. It's worth noting that there are also story characters on top of Variance Project's VTubers, but I'll be talking about them after discussing the factions in order, so as to not make this too confusing. Chiron. Chiron is an empire with scheming nobility and a thirst for power. In the faction debut trailer, we could see the inside of what appears to be a Chiron castle before it was reduced to rubble. It's pretty clear that there's a power struggle within Chiron. On top of this, Variance Project also describes the seat of power, where true inheritors have immense authority, as well as the Festival of the Strong, a tournament to test and honor the warriors of the Empire. It's pretty clear that strength is one of Chiron's greatest assets, and this is further backed by Valorbane, the arcana weapon with a mind of its own that is the strongest weapon in Chiron. While it's unclear what the exact limits of Arcanite and Arcana are, from Valorbane's description it can be turned into magic weapons. However, there doesn't seem to be that many of them in existence, at least as of the present day. Many historical practices have been lost, either from constant infighting and warfare or simply from these traditions not being passed down. Either way, it quickly becomes clear that Chiron is an empire that values power, strength, and riches, and will stop at nothing to conquer its enemies. Corruptors. Perhaps it's fitting I discuss Corruptors after bringing up Arcana, because the Corruptors are driven by an insatiable thirst for Arcana, and had this Arcana take control of them. They are characterized by crystals on their bodies, and will stop at nothing to obtain Arcana. On the Variance website, it's said most act like beasts, but some are able to retain their sentience, though it is unclear as to why some do and others don't. There does seem to be a tiered magic system at play, with some of the stronger minds having a higher ability to control their magic, or in this case Arcana, and others don't have this ability. It is also shown that Arcana can corrupt creatures such as horses as well, so this corruption does not seem to discriminate for any animal, regardless of how much sapience they have. The Corruptors also follow the command of Ezun, the god of chaos. He used to follow the light, but is now imprisoned and looking for revenge. The Variance Project website is vague about how and why Ezun is imprisoned in another dimension, but this does seem to prove at least one possible use of the ancient gates, which now don't seem to function. Only a select few can activate the ancient gates, with most no longer being in use. Perhaps the other gods imprisoned Ezun with these gates, trapping him with no way of coming back. Ezun also seems to have a strange philosophy. Despite being the god of chaos, he wants the liberation of all things from life and death. Since he himself is trapped in a separate dimension, he uses his corruptors as a way of influencing the Variance world. His way of freeing people may turn out for the worse, though, as he may end his people and the world in order to free the people from suffering. It is also worth pointing out that the corruptors have a couple of gifts or abilities they may possess. The Arcane Siphon ability can sap the power of those using Arcana magic, but can also sap the magic of the user. Crystallic Enforcement is a defensive ability that can harden the crystals on the user's body to protect them. And Euphoria of Soulshade is made using corrupted blood to give a power boost, but may lead to corruption upon consumption. Both the Arcana Siphon and Crystallic Enforcement entries have been corrupted, so there may be more to these abilities that will be revealed later. Ziton. I was originally going to talk about Goneden first, but it is a little difficult to talk about Goneden without first talking about the Ziton Corporation. In stasis, Ziton is a technological society run by the Ziton Corporation. Ziton originally took control during a time of peril, but now has eyes and ears everywhere, and seems to be at the heart of everything happening in stasis. Ziton also seems to be trying to take control of other nations too, similar to Chiron. Ziton Corp and Chiron also seem to be fairly large factions in comparison to the others that I will discuss. With such massive influence and control, it is difficult to oppose these bigger factions. But how did Ziton achieve such influence on its population? Ziton is a current innovator when it comes to using arcana, using it for both energy and weaponry. They don't seem to be using arcana for entirely innocent purposes, however, as we can see what appears to be a cryopod with arcana sticking out of it. Ziton is shown to have humans and humanoids merged with technology, but now they are likely merging them with arcana as well, which did not seem to turn out well. Goneden. With a better understanding of where Goneden resides, you can understand how this rebel force came to be. While Ziton seems amazing on the surface, it's clear that there is more to this tech conglomerate, and Goneden wishes to stop it. While Goneden accepts anyone from any background, there is a sort of grouping determined by what unit each member is a part of, categorized by the flower and color of text on their jacket. Goneden is not only opposed to Ziton's massive force, they are also against the use of arcanite for energy, as it is leading to arc blight poisoning, with no current way of depositing the residue. Goneden members are worried about what this might mean for the future of stasis and are seeking ways to fix it and get rid of Ziton. Ziton is making this task difficult, however, as Ziton not only has control of energy warfare and the police force, but they also control the news, labeling Goneden as a terrorist organization. This may lead members of Ziton Corporation, who were previously thinking of joining the group, to keep quiet so as to not be associated with dangerous members of society. Not all hope may be lost, though, as one member seemed to escape a Ziton prison, so it may be possible for this group to overcome Ziton Corporation. Nakota. This faction is made up of clans of animal-eared hermits residing in the forest. Together in their caste system, they work together to protect the forest, their culture, and the Ninsun flowers, which can cure diseases instantly. This caste system is also reinforced by their faction teaser video, which highlights the tribes in a totem pole, with each section representing a caste. Nakota's vast knowledge of plants and medicines help them survive in the wilderness. Outside of apothecaries that take care of these plants and make the medicines, other roles include protecting the sanctuary, which is the sacred grounds of the Nakota. Unlike other factions, they don't rely on technological advancements for protection, but rather on their Iari mercenaries instead. While other factions have more power or technology, Nakota is unified in its ancient traditions, unified spirit, and expertise with nature. Seraphine. While Seraphine may use looks to draw in new believers, the Seraphine faction itself is entirely devoted to the goddess, trying to bring everyone to their message of peace and love. There are many temples called Stellafia of the goddess around, but Seraphine's main city is Stellafia, a floating island upheld by arcana. Here many devoted their lives to worshipping the goddess, who is the only god mentioned outside of Ezun. It is fair to assume that the goddess was likely one of the gods that imprisoned Ezun, and the rest are staying away from the human world or have since faded into obscurity. Another key part of Seraphine's traditions is the tears of the goddess, a liquid meant to give those who drink it immense strength at the possible expense of injuries or even death. Not only does the Seraphine faction have alchemists for this magic liquid, they also have skilled artificers that are trying to coincide with nature rather than simply controlling it. This is highly different from how Ziton scientists have been described, where they are utilizing arcana with some devastating consequences on stasis. Hopefully Seraphine continues with their current scientific approach to keep Stellafia looking serene and pristine. Story characters. On top of their VTubers, Variance Project also has some story characters that are traveling around the Variance universe. These characters include Izume, Blue, and Oilia. While Izume and Blue are not from any particular faction, Oilia is from Cairon, and described as the Empire's last hope. Each story character has their own tagline, with Izume's being the Destined One, and Blue's being the Blobbed Companion. Unfortunately, due to the fact that not much has been revealed about the story characters outside of some teaser images, it is hard to determine what their exact backstories, origins, or even futures entail. It's also worth noting that there have been some images on their Twitter too, but I haven't included all of them as some of them are considered non-canon material. I'm looking forward to what Variance Project has in store and will post in the future. VTubers. As of right now, Variance is debuting 4 VTubers as part of Gen 1. A Ziton VTuber, a Corruptor VTuber, a Chiron VTuber, and a Seraphine VTuber. Something I have become very excited about as a fan is the number of posts Variance Project is releasing on their Twitter. They are practically publishing daily posts, which is great to read, analyze, and get excited about as a fan, but unfortunately likely means that I will not be able to fully capture all of them in this video. I will be trying my best to discuss as many as possible though. For example, each of the VTubers have their own taglines and logos that have culminated into the logo that is now Variance Project's banner on Twitter. Our corruptor VTuber seems to have started out with a tragic past, saying she was desperate to sing and will pay for what they turned this VTuber into. While this post does not define in much detail who they are exactly and what this VTuber was turned into, I would hazard a guess and say that the corruptor was likely not made a corruptor by choice, but instead by some twisted experiment or incident. The background also shows a house in flames, so I would theorize that they perhaps became a corruptor during an arson incident in order to survive, but is now stuck in a crystallized version of their body. The Seraphine VTuber discussed how the goddess has gifted the world so many things, and now humanity must fully support and serve her. The main thing this post embodies is the Seraphine philosophy of devoting one's life to the goddess no matter how hard it gets. Unfortunately, I am not picking up any other hints from this post outside of that. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm interested to hear what y'all think about all of this. The post about the Chiron VTuber seems to be more gambling and casino themed, talking about laying the fate in the cards after being slighted by her own blood. Chiron has been characterized with a lot of infighting, so this VTuber could be a Chiron noble whose family betrayed them for money or power. This may be surprising, but the Ziton post was the one that intrigued me the most. Our Ziton VTuber is a dog detective VTuber investigating the Ziton regime. This VTuber has been given the epithet of the Wanderer and is looking for someone who has been censored out, simply saying error. It is currently unknown who this mysterious figure is. Unfortunately, as of writing the script, there are not many other posts or teaser lore to work with. Variance is sending their posts little by little to keep us in suspense for the VTubers' debuts, so there is likely so much lore for us to come and unpack later, and I am so excited to see what is to come. Theories. I have a couple of theories as to what is going on in the Variance universe, with the factions, the story characters, and the VTubers themselves. I'll try to go in the same order I went to describe the lore itself to try to shed some light on what I think might be going on with the Variance lore. Faction theories. Ziton is trying to recreate the Corruptors. I feel this is less of a theory and more of what Variance is implying, but I think Ziton did not come up with the idea of a Corruptor on their own. Otherwise, Ezun being added into the mix makes less sense. I think Ziton started creating the Corruptors and Arcana experiments after witnessing the corruption phenomena occurring in the wild. This was the most likely progression of Ziton experiments, as it's likely much cheaper and more efficient than creating cyborgs, which is what Ziton is currently doing. Arcana seems to be the only component for these human experiments, so the main thing Ziton would need to navigate is trial and error to minimize the side effects of corruption, which clearly has not worked that well. Ziton does not appear to have much luck in this process, though, and is using the media to cover it up. I'm mainly pointing this out to discuss my second theory. Everyone either hates Ziton or joins Ziton. I already feel that both Goneden and Corruptors don't like Ziton, with Goneden's philosophy despising Ziton and Ziton hoarding all the arcana, but something tells me the other factions don't really like Ziton either. Nakota likely doesn't like them either, as Ziton's ever-expanding technology is impacting their landscape, and Seraphine is most likely neutral, as they don't seem to particularly care about where people come from so long as they worship the goddess. As long as Ziton does not personally disrespect the goddess, they should at least not be on Seraphine's bad side. Now, my personal headcanon is that Chiron and Ziton work together, but in a sort of love-hate relationship. Chiron works with Ziton for their weapons, and Ziton wants Chiron's wealth. The second either of them don't need the other, they'll quickly become enemies. Even their own VTuber is investigating Ziton. It's pretty clear that not everyone is happy with Ziton, but with their usage of media making any opposition out as an extreme threat, it is hard to defy them as of right now. Post-apocalypse theory. This is something that I kinda don't want to be true, because it's something that really leaves more questions than answers, and honestly, I like when stories stand on their own, but one thing I was curious about is how this world came to be, how the tiered magic system was discovered, and more. This theory is sorta simple. The Variance Project was our current world, but with the discovery of arcana, the world was thrust into chaos. The world was trying to find new ways to utilize this new mineral, and also competing to find more and more quantities of the arcanite. Countries who fell into chaos and into collapse, and new nations rose from the ashes. These nations would become the factions that we know today. Having the Variance world be a futuristic version of our own establishes some origins for our factions to see what they were like before we know them as they are now. It does, however, have a few holes as a theory. For one, this world is very much a fantasy world. I'm all for a good film theory, but if this was truly what Variance was going for, there'd be some evidence for it somewhere. There'd be some evolutionary changes, showing all the factions descended from the modern man, or some arcana-fueled changes outside of corruption, something to show that this was true. As of right now, I just don't see this being true. If there is more that shows this to be true, I'll let y'all know. But I think Variance just stands alone in its own world. Why Ezun was exiled? There are very few questions that are bigger than why Ezun was exiled, and for a good reason. The mythology is a fairly large component of Variance's lore, and a huge part of the faction's belief system, so having such huge blanks leaves more questions than answers. We already know how Ezun was exiled through the ancient gates to a dimension of confinement, however, that still leaves one question. Why was Ezun exiled? Now, we only know of the Seraphine goddess, and we don't know much about her or even what she looks like, but I'm not sure how ideologically sound her practices even are. I know in comparison to other factions she may sound relatively better, but she lets her factions use seduction to get new followers. And she doesn't even reveal her own name, and her astral drops can lead to death of her own followers. I'm mainly pointing this out because we're not sure what rule Ezun actually broke to get him exiled. This rule may seem sound to the gods in the Variance universe, but strange to us. We only have two gods' personalities and values to analyze, which is considerably a very small sample size. Judging from their character profiles, Ezun and the goddess have very different outlooks on life. While the goddess has an entire faction worshipping her, Ezun is known as the Child of Balance. Ezun is not even labeled as a god until he gets his Chaos title. As someone who believes in absolute balance, becoming a god seems like the exact opposite of what you would want. If you have power over someone, or in this case, the people of the Variance world, you're causing a power imbalance to occur. This is probably not something Ezun wanted, so I can imagine he would try to convince the other gods to let humans have more power, and his idea got shut down. This would lead him to escalate further and get him exiled. As for what exactly Ezun did to escalate, I think Ezun created the first version of the Corruptors without notifying the other gods. Though, part of me wonders if the main reason why the gods opposed him and led to his exile was not necessarily because of the corruption itself, but because they knew the humans' bodies can't handle the corruption process. I think it would be kind of ironic that some of the gods think they are better than humans only to have their names fade into obscurity, but if they knew that the corruption process would lead to humans losing their sentience, they might not want to be on Ezun's side and thus exile him. The other gods don't seem to want to associate with the goddess either, or else Seraphine would likely have their names on record. This makes Ezun's banishment seem less random and more like stopping an idealist from continuing his fool's errand, at least from their perspective. I would imagine they warned Ezun about the consequences of corruption, only for him to try anyway, leading to his inevitable banishment and insanity from true balance. If the people can't handle balance, then no one should have to live with the impure system, at least from Ezun's perspective. Either way, Ezun's banishment definitely led to him having a very drastic ideology. The PostApocalypse Theory. If you have been paying attention to the faction previews, you would see two versions of each of the factions, one in their prime and one that is destroyed. This kind of coincided with my theory that most of the factions are on the brink of societal collapse. Think about it. Most of these factions are in direct opposition with each other, and the ones that are not are neutral or political allies at best. In worst cases like Goneden and Ziton, success for one means the destruction of the other. For several of these factions, there's really no winning without some bloodshed. Due to constant internal and external fighting, most of these factions are now on their last legs, and need some sort of support to revert to their former glory. I think it'd be cool if the VTubers lore actually covered this, because I think it's a really cool aspect of the world building. Story character theories. Izume was isekai'd. Izume and Blue have been anomalies since they were introduced, with their factions being unknown. It's clear they're traveling the world, having different teasers of Izume around the world and Izume finding Ophelia. Variance purposefully made it unclear where Izume and Blue exactly came from, but I have two different ideas as to where she came from, one of them being that she's isekai'd. One of the reasons I think she's isekai'd is only a select few can use the ancient gates to bypass the flux storms to access the different factions. As far as we know right now, the main people who can use the ancient gates are the gods. It's implied that Seraphine has been able to send information to other places, as there are temples all over the Variance faction spaces, but that doesn't necessarily mean the faction members can use the ancient gates themselves. There's the possibility the goddess is helping them out, or this information was already in those locations in the first place. To have someone who actually seems to travel through these gates is already rare, and adding on to the fact that we don't know where she's from adds on to the mystery. Perhaps her original world has more people who can use these powers, or she needs to use these newfound powers to save the world and come home. This isekai theory would also count as an homage to Variance Project's origins as DigiLive. Variance Project originally started out as DigiLive before changing their name to Variance Project a couple years later. Izume and Blue's designs would change to match the new name and lore. Her being isekai'd would provide an internal and external reason for her and Blue's existence in this new world. Izume and Blue were Zyon Experiments. I know this theory sounds crazy, and I'm not saying this just because they're both blue. Both of these characters have powers that not many people in this world seem to have, and Ziton has already been known to do human experiments. Maybe I've been watching too many indie horror videos or game theory videos, but usually the next step in these experiments are to either cut costs, do something no one else can, or make something as human as possible. The Arcana experiments already cut costs, and both Blue and Izume are capable of extraordinary things. Now, I don't think Izume is entirely artificial, but Blue not only seems to be the only one of his kind, as we have not seen any other color-changing rabbit blobs of mysterious origin yet, but his abilities are still mostly unknown. Part of why their faction may be unknown is that they technically were from Ziton as part of the experiments, but they don't want to be affiliated with Ziton and are running away. Oilia was exiled royalty. Oilia is the main story character we know the most about, which honestly is not saying a lot. Her epithet says she is the Empire's last hope, which doesn't necessarily say a lot, but I'm assuming that the reason she left involves finding Valorbane, one of the most powerful Cairon weapons, and reclaiming the throne to have power and use it for good. However, other Cairon members would feel threatened by this behavior and give her a hard time, stalling her at best and exiling her at worst. It would explain how she ran into Izume and would line up with what we know about the Cairon VTuber in Gen 1, as she was also betrayed by her family. Hopefully Oilia can obtain Valorbane and bring back Cairon to its former glory and lead her faction to a brighter future. VTuber Theories. Not much is known about the VTubers right now, but that doesn't mean we can't theorize about what's to come with this first generation of VTubers. Who is Error? Considering it is Ziton who likely censored the post, we would have a wide range of people to work with as to who would this Error person be. From a Goneden official to a Ziton scientist who questioned too much. Both of these roles would be significant and potentially dangerous enough to worry Ziton, and would likely require the use of Ziton's media team to cover up their existence. A less likely option that Error is similar to is how I would imagine Izume's role to be, a traveler touring the world and learning about everything the Variance world has to offer. This would also align with the line, retrace your footsteps. The Ziton VTuber would need to retrace the footsteps of our lone traveler to figure out where exactly Error went missing. The only thing that doesn't make sense is how exactly this would annoy Ziton officials. Don't get me wrong, tourists can definitely disturb the order of places if they don't follow the rules, but I'm not sure how one person who simply wants to visit would piss off an entire corporate government to get their name suddenly censored and their friends and loved ones never seeing them again. Either way, this person is someone close to the Ziton VTuber, and they are now searching for this person in order to figure out where they went. But what do you think? What do you think about the Variance Project lore, and what faction is your favorite so far? Personally, my favorite is Nakota. Also, let me know what you think of this video, as this is quickly turning into one of the longest I have ever done, and I would love to know what y'all think. As always, I hope y'all have a magnificent day, and I'll see y'all later.